On Christmas Eve, they made her sleep in the RV, parked outside her own son's house. Dorothy Monroe, retired school bus driver and widow, didn't argue. Kyle called it cozy. Vanessa called it temporary. But before sunrise, Dorothy had found the title in the glove box, her name stamped in blue ink. By the time they noticed she was gone, she'd already filed, notarized, and blocked their numbers. She wasn't running, she was reclaiming. And when they came screaming about what she'd stolen, the Montana State Seal said otherwise. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The snow started early that Christmas Eve, thick flakes tumbling through the yellow light of the street lamps as Dorothy Monroe eased her sedan up her son's long, icy driveway. Her wipers squeaked across the glass, beating in time with her heart. She'd pressed her good red coat flat across the passenger seat, trying not to wrinkle it, something her late husband would have teased her about. Dot, nobody's grading your coat. From the front window of the house, colored lights blinked lazily. She could make out silhouettes moving inside, Vanessa setting a table, Kyle pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. Dorothy smiled anyway. It was Christmas. Family time. She carried a tin of fudge in one hand and a wrapped package in the other as she stepped onto the porch. The wreath was new this year, store-bought, nothing like the pine cone ones she and Kyle used to make when he was little. She pressed the doorbell once, twice, before Vanessa appeared. "Oh, Dot," Vanessa said, her voice sugar-sweet and tight. "You made it. Listen, we're a little cramped this year. Kyle's cousin and his kids showed up last minute, so we set you up cozy in the RV out back." Dorothy blinked. "The RV? It's just until the weekend," Kyle called from behind her, his tone brisk, already defensive. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and didn't quite meet her eyes. "Plenty of room out there. Got blankets and everything." Dorothy looked past them into the house, the couch downstairs empty, stockings hung in a neat row. A faint smell of ham drifted through the air. The warmth reached her face but stopped at the threshold, like she wasn't meant to step fully inside. "Oh," she said quietly. "That's thoughtful." Vanessa smiled with relief, missing the edge in Dorothy's tone. "You'll have privacy. And, it's kind of festive out there, don't you think?" Through the kitchen window, Dorothy could see the RV parked at the far end of the yard, a white hulk half buried in snow, its windows dark. The word Aspen Trail glimmered faintly on its side. "Come on, Mom," Kyle said, lifting her suitcase before she could protest. "We'll get you settled." They crunched through the snow together, his breath fogging in the cold. Dorothy watched her son's shoulders hunch against the wind. He'd lost weight since she last saw him, jaw sharper, movements quicker, more brittle. She wondered if that was what failure looked like after a few hard years. He yanked the RV door open, cold air spilled out, sharp and metallic. Inside, the small space smelled of dust and old coffee. A thin blanket lay folded at the foot of the narrow bed. "See?" Vanessa said behind them, cheerful and already turning away. "Cozy." Kyle dropped her suitcase with a thud and rubbed his palms together. "I'll fire up the propane tomorrow. For tonight, just bundle up." Dorothy looked at him steadily. "The basement couch looks empty." He hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Vanessa's cousin's kids are down there. You know how it is." She didn't. Not anymore. A soft knock on the metal door made them both turn. Tessa stood there, pink-cheeked and small against the snow, holding a thermos. "Grandma," she whispered, glancing back toward the house. "I made cocoa. Mom said not to, but it's hot." Dorothy's throat tightened. She took the thermos and cupped it in both hands. "Thank you, sweetheart." Tessa leaned closer. "I'm sorry they made you stay out here." "It's all right," Dorothy murmured. "I've been colder places." Kyle's voice sharpened. "Tessa, back inside." The girl obeyed, trudging toward the house, her boots leaving small, lonely prints that the wind immediately began to fill. When the door shut behind her son, silence dropped heavy and complete. Dorothy sat on the edge of the narrow bed, unscrewed the thermos lid, and breathed in the steam. Rich chocolate and a hint of cinnamon, the only real warmth she'd been offered all night. From the house, faint laughter drifted across the yard, muffled by snow. She watched the lights blink red and green through the frost-spattered window and thought about all the doors she'd opened in her life for other people. Now one had quietly closed on her. Her gaze shifted to the dashboard. A small glove box sat beneath it, dusted with powder from the cold. She reached out absently, brushing it clean, the metal cool under her fingers. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen driveway. Inside, Dorothy whispered to herself, "Merry Christmas, Dot," and listened to how lonely it sounded. Then, just before she switched off the small reading lamp, a glint of white caught her eye near the driver's seat. A folded envelope wedged beside the steering column, half hidden in shadow. She hesitated, the cocoa cooling in her hands. The cocoa had gone lukewarm by the time Dorothy finished the last sip. It coated her throat in sweetness that didn't reach her chest. The RV ticked and creaked around her, expanding in the cold, shrinking again with each gust that rattled the metal shell. A small curtain trembled in the draft leaking through the window frame. She wrapped the thin blanket tighter across her shoulders, rubbing her hands together for heat. Breath clouded in front of her face, turning the air into visible ghosts. She could still hear the laughter from the house, a movie playing, silverware clinking, the muffled rhythm of family life she used to belong to. The thermos sat empty on the table. Outside, the house windows glowed gold against the snow, every one of them sealed tight. Dorothy traced the outline of her husband's name engraved faintly on her wedding band. The gesture was automatic, something she did when the quiet started pressing too hard. Her husband, Hank, had always hated silence. He'd fill it with humming, with radio chatter, with the low rumble of a diesel engine. He'd say, "Movement keeps you warm, Dot. Get behind the wheel, or get left behind." She could almost hear his voice now, that scratchy baritone softened by a grin. Dorothy looked around the small space. A kitchenette, 2 narrow benches, a bed built into the wall. The kind of place meant for road trips and summer mornings, not exile in December. She laughed softly under her breath, a brittle sound that surprised her. "Cozy," Vanessa had called it. Dorothy glanced toward the window again. The house lights had dimmed, the living room curtains now drawn. She imagined the smell of cinnamon rolls baking, the scrape of chairs on hardwood, the small rituals that used to include her. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. She pulled open a cabinet above the stove, searching for another one, maybe some spare bedding. Instead, she found an old owner's manual tucked between a few paper towels and a stack of expired maps. She sat down at the tiny table, flipping through the brittle pages. There were diagrams of water tanks, maintenance schedules, safety instructions. Someone had scribbled notes in the margins. Hank's handwriting, neat and deliberate. Her chest tightened. Oil filter, replaced 2016. Battery, still strong. Title and reg, Glovebox. Dorothy stared at that last line. Her eyes shifted toward the Glovebox, the same one she'd brushed clean earlier. The folded envelope was still wedged there, the corner of it catching faint light from the lamplight. The RV creaked again, louder this time, a sound like settling bones. She stood slowly, her knees stiff from the cold, and crossed to the driver's seat. When she tugged the envelope free, a puff of dust rose into the air. Inside were 2 documents, a folded insurance bill and a thick, official-looking paper with a blue Montana seal stamped across the top. Her heart beat once, hard. Vehicle title, Aspen Trail Travel RV, owner C. as Henry and Dorothy Monroe. The words blurred for a second as she blinked. She traced her finger under her name. There it was, clear as day, like the world had quietly remembered something her family had chosen to forget. A slow warmth spread through her chest, not from cocoa or blankets, but from recognition. They'd put her out here thinking she was temporary, thinking she was disposable. But this small, forgotten paper said otherwise. She leaned back in the driver's seat, the cracked leather cold against her back, and stared out at the house. Snow kept falling, soft and endless, coating everything the same, even them, even her. Her breath steadied. "Get behind the wheel or get left behind," she murmured again, the words firmer this time. The engine key hung from a small hook beside the steering column, swaying slightly each time the wind rocked the RV. It caught the light, just for a moment. Dorothy didn't reach for it. Yet. She simply watched it swing, the quiet ticking of the metal against the dash like a pulse. Somewhere deep inside her, the first spark of something unfamiliar and powerful began to rise. Not anger exactly, but clarity. She folded the title neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she turned off the light. Outside, the snow fell harder, the sound soft and endless, covering her tracks before she could even make them. The wind had died sometime before dawn, leaving the world outside heavy and still. Frost webbed across the RV windows, turning the light from the house into pale, fractured halos. Dorothy sat in the driver's seat, the envelope open again on her lap. The title paper crackled softly as she smoothed it flat against her knees. Her name stared back at her. Not shared, not borrowed, not temporary. Dorothy Monroe. The realization bloomed slow and steady, like thaw creeping through frozen soil. Hank had put both their names on the title years ago, back when the RV had been their shared dream. Weekends in Glacier, lazy breakfasts on the road. Then he'd passed, and everything. His pension, his tools, even the photos in their house, had been parceled out, discussed, absorbed. But no one had checked this. When Hank died, ownership had slid quietly, legally, entirely to her. Dorothy ran her fingertip along the blue seal. "You old fool," she whispered, smiling. "You left me a way out, didn't you?" The heater was dead, but she didn't feel cold anymore. The clarity worked like kindling, feeding something deep inside that she hadn't felt in years. Agency. She looked toward the window. The house loomed silent now, a rectangle of warmth she no longer envied. Kyle had probably assumed the RV was his. He'd parked it here, treated it like backyard decor, same as he treated her. A relic to be stored neatly out of sight. Dorothy pictured his face when he realized that assumption was wrong. A small, quiet satisfaction warmed her palms. She reached for the ignition key, testing its weight. The metal was stiff in the slot, reluctant at first, but when she turned it, the engine coughed, then rumbled to life. A low, steady growl filled the cabin, shaking the frost loose from the glass. The vibration traveled through the floor, into her bones. The sound was alive, familiar, comforting. For a heartbeat, she could see Hank in the passenger seat, his elbow propped on the window, grinning as the open road unfurled ahead. She exhaled shakily and let the engine idle, its warmth finally pushing the cold from the air. On the dash, the VIN plate caught her eye. Small, stamped metal, dull with age. She took out her phone, steadying her hand against the tremor of adrenaline. She snapped photos of the title, the VIN, even the registration tucked in the visor. Each click felt like a small claim staked back into her life. Proof, protection, power. When she was done, she slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of her coat, close to her heart. A light tapping startled her. She turned to see Tessa at the door again, bundled in a red robe, her breath fogging the glass. Dorothy unlocked it quickly before the child froze. Tessa stepped inside, the smell of sugar cookies following her. She carried a chipped plate, its edge dusted with powdered sugar. "Mom said I could bring you some if I hurry," she whispered. "They're watching Elf." Dorothy smiled faintly. "She's generous when it's convenient." Tessa didn't seem to understand, just climbed onto the bench, kicking her slippered feet. "Are you okay out here, Grandma?" "I'm fine, Peanut." Dorothy brushed a crumb from the girl's sleeve. "You go on back before they notice." Tessa hesitated, looking at the running engine. "Are you going somewhere?" Dorothy followed her gaze to the soft plume of exhaust curling from the tailpipe. She hadn't even noticed how natural it felt, the hum beneath her feet, the steady warmth returning to her hands. "Not yet," she said softly. "But I might." Tessa frowned in thought, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. She handed over one last cookie and slipped out into the snow. Dorothy waited until the house door clicked shut before killing the engine. The sudden silence pressed in again, but it didn't sting anymore. She sat still for a long while, the paper edges rustling faintly in her coat pocket. Outside, the house lights flickered through the frost like distant stars, beautiful and unreachable. Her phone screen glowed in the dim cabin light. She opened the gallery, scrolling through the new photos. The VIN, the title, her name in blue ink. Each image was a promise, a record that couldn't be talked over or taken back. Dorothy closed the phone, feeling the weight of that truth settle into her chest like something solid and steady. For the first time in years, she wasn't a guest in her own life. The first light of dawn seeped over the mountains, a soft gray wash that turned the snow into muted glass. Dorothy Monroe sat behind the wheel, gloved hands resting on the steering wheel, breath fogging the air. The house was still. No movement in the windows, no sound but the low hum of the RV's idling engine. The sky was the color of pewter, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy. Dorothy eased the gear into reverse. The tires crunched softly through the crust of ice, and the RV began to roll backward down the long driveway. No lights flicked on inside the house. No doors opened. She half expected Kyle to burst out shouting, waving his arms like he did when he caught her trimming his hedges without asking. But the world stayed quiet. When the RV reached the road, she paused. The rearview mirror held one last reflection of the house, a glowing box of warmth she used to call home. She could almost see the ghost of herself standing there on the porch years ago, casserole in hand, waiting to be invited in. Dorothy shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator. The tires bit the frozen ground, and the RV lurched forward, steady and sure. "Get behind the wheel," she whispered, "or get left behind." The words no longer sounded like her husband's. They belonged to her now. The highway out of Missoula was nearly empty, just a few semis hauling before sunrise. Snowbanks lined the road, pale ridges catching the first blush of morning. Dorothy turned the heat up, feeling it blow weak but persistent against her legs. She followed a green sign pointing toward a truck stop on the outskirts of town. Lou's van, faded white with mobile notary services stenciled crookedly on the side, was parked near the edge of the lot, beside a row of sleeping rigs. Lou Chen was hunched over a clipboard inside, glasses fogged, coffee steaming in his cup holder. When Dorothy tapped on his window, he looked up and grinned. "Well, I'll be damned. Dot Monroe. Haven't seen you since the bus yard potluck." Dorothy smiled, her breath rising in clouds. "Morning, Lou. You still do Christmas hours?" "For you?" He pushed open the passenger door. "Always. But it better be something good." Dorothy climbed in, pulling the folded envelope from her coat. "Just need to reaffirm ownership on this." Lou adjusted his glasses, reading through the title. "Aspen Trail Travel RV," he said slowly. "Henry Monroe. And, well, would you look at that? You're the surviving title holder." He whistled low. What brings this on Christmas morning? Dorothy looked out toward the highway where dawn was sharpening into daylight. Call it a family reminder. People forget who owns what. Lou chuckled, shaking his head as he stamped the paperwork. A Christmas transfer. Bold move, Dot. I'll notarize it clean. You want me to file a digital copy with the state? Please do. She hesitated, then added, and I need to update my insurance. Add a clause. He arched a brow. Blocking anyone in particular? Kyle Monroe. Her voice didn't waver. No authorization to drive or claim coverage. Lou made a note, lips twitching in amusement. You're not just driving. You're taking back the wheel. Hank would have liked that. Dorothy smiled faintly. He'd tell me I was late to the party. The papers came together quickly. Signatures, stamps, official seals pressed into the corner. Lou slid everything into a manila folder and handed it over. There you go. You're now the confirmed and sole owner of one slightly frosty RV. Merry Christmas, Dot. Merry Christmas, Lou. As she left the van, the sky had shifted to pale blue, the first sunlight glinting off snowdrifts. The world smelled like diesel and coffee and cold air. She slid into the driver's seat, the title folder resting beside her like a sleeping cat. 10 minutes later, she parked at a roadside diner, its neon sign half lit. Sunrise Grill, open 24 hours. She left the engine running, the heater humming, and went inside. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt toast. A single waitress refilled coffee for the truckers huddled in the corner booth. Dorothy sat at the counter and ordered pancakes. When the waitress poured her coffee, Dorothy's hands trembled. Not from nerves, but from the sudden rush of possibility. Through the frosted window, she could see the RV sitting solid and ready in the lot. Her lot. The thought filled her like a secret sunrise. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, every small decision that belonged entirely to her. When she paid, the waitress slid a receipt toward her and said, "Travelin' somewhere?" Dorothy smiled, folding her change neatly. "Maybe just finding my way back." Outside, the cold bit through her coat again, but she didn't mind. She climbed into the RV, shut the door, and let the warmth wrap around her. The title sat on the dashboard, sunlight crawling across her name. For the first time in a long while, Dorothy didn't feel invisible. She looked toward the open road, where the mountains caught the dawn like mirrors and whispered, "Now we start fresh." The RV's engine purred, waiting. By the time the Missoula DMV opened, the sun had cleared the ridgeline, turning the snow into a blinding field of white. Dorothy parked the RV between two plowed mounds, engine idling in a low, contented hum. A flock of crows picked at the ice near a drainage grate, black against the glittering ground. She caught her reflection in the glass door as she approached, hair a little wild, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes sharp and alert. She hadn't seen herself like this in years, not tired, not small, just ready. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the air smelling faintly of printer toner and coffee from a vending machine. A Christmas garland drooped sadly across the counter, half its bulbs burnt out. Dorothy took a number, AU-08, and settled into a plastic chair. A poster on the wall read, "Your vehicle, your responsibility." She smiled at that. When her number flashed, she approached the counter. The clerk was a young woman with red hair pulled into a messy bun and a candy cane pin on her shirt. Her name tag read, Karine. "Morning," Karine said brightly. "How can I help you today?" Dorothy set her folder down, the manila edges fanning open like wings. "I'm here to file a title transfer and verify sole ownership." Karen flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising. "Aspen Trail Travel RV? Huh, we don't get many of these on Christmas Day." "It's overdue," Dorothy said simply. The young woman scanned the title. "Okay, so you were co-owner with Henry Monroe?" Dorothy nodded. My husband, he passed last year. She slid a death certificate across the counter, folded neatly inside its sleeve. He always kept our paperwork in order. I'm just making sure it stays that way. Karen's tone softened. I'm sorry for your loss. Dorothy managed a small smile. He left me a good map. Karen moved briskly after that, typing, stamping, scanning. You've got the notarized letter confirming ownership and the updated insurance? Dorothy produced them, each document crisp and ready. Lou's notary stamp gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. Everything looks perfect, Karen said. You did all the hard work for me. Dorothy watched the woman feed the last paper into the printer. It came back with a thick blue header and her name printed clean across the top. Dorothy Monroe, sole title holder. Karen turned the page, reached for a heavy rubber stamp, and pressed it down with a satisfying thunk. It's yours. The sound echoed through the small office, final and absolute. Dorothy exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders like air from a balloon. For the first time, her husband's absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like direction. When she stepped outside, the light was almost too bright to look at. The wind had picked up, sharp against her face, but she didn't pull her collar closed. She liked the sting. It reminded her she was alive. The RV waited at the curb, a quiet engine, a steady heart. Her phone buzzed the moment she turned the key. One new voicemail, then another, and another. She didn't need to listen to know the tone. Kyle's anger always came in layers. First disbelief, then outrage, then guilt disguised as yelling. Dorothy tapped play anyway. Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just take off like this. That RV's mine. Ours. Call me back right now. The second one came moments later, his voice cracking under strain. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just bring it back. Vanessa's furious. The third was quieter. You're not thinking straight. I don't want to have to involve anyone. Dorothy deleted none of them. She saved each one carefully to a new folder labeled Harassment, Kyle M. She'd learned long ago that silence was better documented than argued. When she put the phone down, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. Still calm, still in control. The world outside spun its storms. She stayed steady in the center. A few minutes later, her phone pinged again. Not a call this time, but a notification from social media. Vanessa's post glared in bright letters. Some people steal at Christmas and still expect to be called family. Dorothy almost laughed. The words were meant to wound, but they rolled off like sleet on a windshield. She typed nothing in return. Instead, she took a photo through the RV's windshield. The blue sky, the state seal stamped on the corner of her new title, and saved it quietly to her gallery. Outside the DMV, a gust of wind blew hard enough to rattle the mirrors. Dorothy watched the snow swirl across the lot, twisting into a small tornado before scattering into sunlight. Good try, weather, she murmured, but I've seen worse. She put the RV in gear, the title folder safe beside her. The tires crunched over the icy lot as she pulled onto the highway again, the mountains glinting like glass ahead of her. She had errands to run, files to make official, a new life to register, and somewhere behind her, a house waking up to its own mistakes. Snow whispered against the stained glass windows as Dorothy slipped into the back pew of St. Paul's. The sanctuary glowed faintly with candlelight, the air thick with pine and the hush of Christmas morning. Children's scarves hung over pew backs, and the smell of coffee drifted from the fellowship hall. Dorothy folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't here for the sermon. She already knew the words by heart. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. It wasn't peace she needed. It was stillness. Reverend Mark's voice carried warmly from the pulpit. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark suit flecked with melted snow. Sometimes, he said, We think God has closed a door, but maybe he's just asking us to find a new one. Dorothy felt that line sink deep, landing right in the ache behind her ribs. She glanced at the nativity scene near the altar, the figurines arranged neatly, every face turned toward the child. It struck her that even here, in this perfect tableau, everyone had a place. After the service, people filed out in clusters of laughter and scarves. Reverend Mark lingered near the aisle, shaking hands. When he spotted Dorothy, his face softened. "Dot Monroe," he said gently. "Haven't seen you in a while. Everything all right?" Dorothy hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'm uninvited, but not undone." The Reverend chuckled quietly, the kind of laugh that respected what it didn't fully understand. "That sounds like something you'd say?" He studied her for a beat longer, his tone lowering. "You need a place to park that rig of yours for a bit? The church lot's empty this week. No questions asked." She blinked, surprised by the kindness. "You sure you don't mind a little eyesore out there?" Mark shook his head. "We've got folks sleeping worse places. At least you'll be close to a power outlet." Dorothy nodded, throat tightening. "Thank you. Truly. Stay as long as you need." By afternoon, the RV sat tucked along the edge of the church parking lot, snow piled in soft ridges around the tires. The stained glass gleamed faintly in the rearview mirror, colors shifting as clouds passed overhead. Lou pulled up an hour later in his notary van, the side door creaking open. "Heard you got yourself a temporary chapel spot," he said, hopping out with a grin. "Brought you something." He handed her a thick heated blanket still in its packaging and an inverter kit. "Keep this plugged in overnight, you won't wake up a popsicle." Dorothy laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "You spoil me, Lou." "Nah, just taking care of one of my own." He tapped the side of the RV affectionately. "You know, it suits you. Always figured you'd end up on the move." "Guess I just needed the right reason." Lou gave her a nod that said more than words, then drove off, taillights fading into the dusk. Inside the RV, Dorothy unwrapped the blanket, draped it over the bed, and plugged it in. The heat spread slow and sure, sinking into her bones. She opened a can of soup, poured it into a small pot, and set it to warm on the stove. The simple act, stirring, tasting, waiting, felt like reclaiming a rhythm that had been stolen from her. Steam fogged the small window above the sink. Beyond it, the church lights flickered on, bathing the snow in a soft amber glow. Dorothy ladled the soup into a mug, wrapped her hands around it, and sat at the tiny table. For the first time all day, she felt safe. Not forgiven, not healed. Just safe. Her phone lay on the counter, silent. She stared at it for a long time before unlocking the screen. The missed calls from Kyle sat unanswered, each one stamped with desperation. Dorothy ignored them. Instead, she scrolled to Tessa's contact and pressed record. Her voice came out steady, almost warm. "Hey, Peanut. Just wanted to say I miss you. Hope you saved me a Christmas cookie." She hesitated, then added softly, "Don't worry about Grandma, okay? I'm fine. Better than fine." She ended the message before she could overthink it. Outside, snow started again, thick, quiet, steady. Dorothy pulled the curtain back, watching it fall against the churchyard. A single candle still burned inside, glowing like a heart that refused to go out. She finished her soup, the warmth lingering long after the mug was empty. The morning after Christmas dawned brittle and clear. Sunlight cut through the cold air, throwing prisms across the church parking lot where Dorothy's RV sat gleaming under its fresh coat of frost. The town was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that always came after a storm. Inside, Dorothy sipped instant coffee from a chipped mug. The heated blanket hummed softly beneath her knees, and the faint scent of soup still lingered from the night before. She had just begun to feel the calm settle in when her phone buzzed on the counter. Once, twice, then again. The first text lit up the screen. Kyle. You had no right. That was our trip vehicle. Dorothy stared at the words, her pulse steady but her breath catching. Our trip vehicle, she whispered, tasting the irony. He hadn't touched the RV in years, hadn't even noticed when she cleaned it, checked its tires, or paid the insurance premiums herself. Another buzz followed, harder this time, vibrating against the counter like a warning. Vanessa. You're lucky we don't call the cops. This is theft. Dorothy set the mug down carefully. She let the phone buzz again and again, each message stacking on the last, the thread growing like a storm front she could see but not feel. She scrolled to her gallery and opened the photo she'd taken at the DMV, the stamped title with her name printed in clean blue letters. Dorothy converted it into a PDF, titled it simply proof.pdf, and attached it to a new message. Dorothy. For your records. She hit send, then placed the phone face down on the counter. For a moment, silence returned. The hum of the heater, the ticking of the cooling stovetop, the faint chime of bells from the church across the lot. It all folded back around her like soft insulation. Then the phone buzzed once more. She hesitated before turning it over. The message wasn't from Kyle or Vanessa. Tessa. Photo attached. Dorothy opened it. A picture filled the screen. Tessa sitting on the couch at home, eyes red, cheeks wet. A Christmas tree glowed behind her, lights dimmed to a blur. Beneath the image, the text read, "Mom says you stole Christmas." The words hit harder than she expected. Dorothy pressed her thumb against the glass, tracing the curve of her granddaughter's face. The girl's pajamas were the same red plaid ones she'd worn last year, the ones Dorothy had bought on clearance at Target. She blinked rapidly, her vision warping with tears that came hot and fast. She hadn't cried when they shut her out of the house, hadn't cried when the door closed behind her. But this was different. Her phone screen blurred, the photo swimming in light. Dorothy drew in a long breath through her nose, slow and steady. Then, with her hand shaking only slightly, she pressed delete. The message vanished, replaced by the quiet glow of her home screen. The silence afterward felt like stepping into clean air. She reached for the small notepad near the stove and wrote something down in her neat, looping hand. Some love has to grow outside the house that forgot it. The phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID made her smile. "Morning, Lou," she answered. "Morning, Dot. How's the Queen of Cold Independence doing?" Dorothy chuckled softly. "Holding steady." Though the royals seemed displeased. Lou's laughter rolled warm through the speaker. "Yeah, I saw the drama online. Don't worry, I got something for that. I already have soup and heat. What else could I need?" "Security," he said. "Got an old GPS tracker from my brother's hauling rig. I'll wire it in for you. No one's following that camper without you knowing. I'll even toss in a door alarm kit. Consider it an early birthday gift?" Dorothy hesitated, the offer catching her off guard. "You think I need that?" "I think it won't hurt to stay one move ahead," Lou said, voice turning serious. "You rattled a few cages, Dot. People do stupid things when their pride gets bruised." She looked out the window toward the quiet road, the sunlight reflecting off ice like tiny knives. "Maybe you're right." "Always am," he said. "I'll swing by tomorrow." After he hung up, Dorothy stared out at the churchyard, where snow shimmered under the pale winter sun. Her reflection glowed faintly in the glass. Tired, yes, but clear-eyed. Strong. She reached into her coat pocket and touched the folded title there, the paper now soft from handling. Her name, her claim, her proof of existence. The world beyond the parking lot still turned. People shopping, gossiping, posting. Let them. She had no more explanations left to give. She turned the phone off completely, the screen fading to black. Then she opened the cabinet, pulled down a small can of coffee, and began measuring out grounds for another pot. The sound of the scoop against the tin was steady, grounding. Outside, a gust of wind scattered snow across the lot, erasing her tire tracks again. By late morning, the church lot was a mirror of ice. Sunlight hit the snow so bright it seemed to hum. Dorothy sat at her little table, wrapped in her heated blanket, a quiet jazz station playing low through the RV's old speakers. She was jotting a grocery list, instant coffee, soup mix, road map, when the first sound reached her. A car door slammed, then another. The voices followed, sharp and carried on the cold. "Mom!" She froze. Kyle's tone was angry but uncertain, cracking in the middle. Then Vanessa's voice sliced through, high and brittle. "Come out, Dorothy. We're not playing this game." Dorothy set her pen down. The clock on the microwave read 11:07. She stood, her heart thudding slow and solid. Through the small window she could see their SUV angled crooked near the church sign, its tires half on the curb. Vanessa stood beside it, arms crossed tight, her breath fogging in furious bursts. Dorothy didn't move toward the door. Vanessa shouted again. "You can't hide behind church property. You think this makes you right?" Dorothy reached over and flicked off the radio. The silence thickened. Kyle's voice came next, quieter. "Mom, let's just talk, okay? We can work this out." Dorothy looked at the coat hanging by the door. The title was still tucked in its inside pocket. The thought steadied her. "Work this out," she repeated softly, shaking her head. There was nothing to work out. The paper was ink. The stamp was law. Outside, Vanessa kept yelling. "You took what doesn't belong to you. You think people don't notice? You think everyone feels sorry for you because you're old and alone?" Dorothy's jaw clenched. The words hit the window like pebbles. She stepped back from the door and let the blinds hang. She wasn't going to give Vanessa the show she wanted. Not this time. The shouting drew the attention of someone else. The church door opened, and Reverend Mark stepped outside in his black coat, scarf fluttering in the wind. He crossed the lot with measured steps, snow crunching beneath his boots. "Can I help you folks?" he called out. Vanessa turned, half startled. "We're here for family business," she snapped. "Private matter." Mark's expression didn't change. "This is church property," he said, voice calm but firm. "And I believe she doesn't want visitors today." Dorothy couldn't hear the rest, only the tone, a line drawn quietly, respectfully. Vanessa muttered something Dorothy couldn't make out. Then a car door slammed again, harder this time. The engine revved. Gravel spun in the air, peppering the side of the RV as the SUV tore out of the lot, fishtailing briefly before straightening toward the main road. Mark stood still for a moment, watching until they disappeared. Then he looked toward the RV and gave a single nod, as if to say, "You're safe." He turned back toward the church and went inside. Dorothy waited several beats before moving. Her knees felt steady, not shaken. She pulled the blinds aside and peeked through. The lot was empty again, just tire tracks and churned snow where the SUV had been. She let the blinds fall shut. The quiet returned like a blanket. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she sat back down. She reached for her phone and opened the local police department's non-emergency site. Her typing was deliberate, methodical. Potential threat of escalation. Family members arrived shouting. Vehicle fled scene. No damage, but would like incident noted. She hit submit and watched the confirmation screen appear. It felt strangely ceremonial, like closing a door that had been left open too long. Outside, the sun dipped low, throwing long blue shadows across the lot. The stained glass window in the church caught the light, spilling color over the snow. Amber, sapphire, blood red. Dorothy watched it through the window, mesmerized. By nightfall, she'd made cocoa again, the ritual comforting in its repetition. The first sip was sweet and thick, the way Tessa liked it. Dorothy opened her journal, the same one she used to keep grocery budgets and bus routes, and wrote in careful cursive, "They came angry. They left empty. I feel like me again." She underlined me once. Hard. The heater clicked on, and the RV filled with warmth and the faint hum of electricity. Dorothy set the mug down, then reached for the curtain to close it for the night. Through the narrow crack, she saw something move at the far edge of the lot, a pair of headlights pausing at the curb before slipping away into the dark. Her fingers froze on the fabric. The letter reached the Monroe's mailbox 2 days later. Plain white envelope, no return address. The kind of mail people open standing up, already assuming it's nothing. Kyle ripped it open at the kitchen counter, still in his work boots, the coffee maker sputtering behind him. Vanessa stood nearby, scrolling on her phone, her voice flat. "It's probably another bill. Your mom's probably listed you as her emergency contact again." But when he pulled out the document and unfolded it, the paper was heavier than mail usually was. Official paper? State paper. Across the top, Montana Department of Motor Vehicles, Certificate of Title Confirmation. Kyle blinked once, then again. His eyes found the name printed clean in blue ink. Owner, Dorothy Monroe. He went pale. "You've got to be kidding me." Vanessa looked up. "What?" He handed it to her without a word. She scanned it, jaw tightening with each line. When she reached the end, she made a low sound in her throat, half laugh, half hiss. "She's going to sell it." "She wouldn't," Kyle said, but it sounded weak even to him. Vanessa tossed the paper down on the counter. "Oh yes, she would. She's making a statement." "That's theft, Kyle. She's stealing from her own son." Kyle rubbed his hands over his face, muttering, "The RV was on my land. It's been parked there for years." "Not in your name, apparently." Vanessa snapped the paper straight, reading it again. She filed a new title, updated insurance, notarized everything. Who helped her with this? But the answer was already obvious. Lu Chen. "She's going to sell it," Vanessa repeated, her voice rising. "You need to stop her before she does something stupid." Kyle didn't answer. He stared out the window at the frozen yard where the RV used to sit. A faint rectangle of bare grass now pressed flat beneath the snow. Across town, the RV's engine purred as Dorothy pulled into the lot of a dealership called Mountain Trails Motors, its lot stacked with gleaming fifth wheels and shiny Class A rigs. A plastic Santa leaned drunkenly near the entrance, half buried in snow. Inside, the air smelled like vinyl and coffee. A salesman in a red parka approached with the practiced smile of someone used to people browsing their dreams. "Morning, ma'am. Looking to trade up or cash out?" Dorothy held out her folder. "Neither. Just need an appraisal." He led her outside to where the RV idled near the fence. "Aspen Trail, huh? Early 2010s model?" 2013, she said. He did a slow walk around, tapping on the panels, checking the tires, glancing at the odometer. "Well maintained," he said finally. "You keep it stored indoors?" "Mostly," Dorothy said. "Until recently." The man scribbled a few notes, then leaned against the doorframe, breath puffing white. "I can tell you right now, if you were selling this month, I could list it for 32, maybe 34,000. And that's low season." Dorothy nodded. The number didn't shock her. It wasn't about the money. It was about proof of worth. That someone could look at what she'd protected, what she'd maintained, and see value. The salesman smiled. "If you decide to list, come see me first. These don't sit long." "I'll think about it," Dorothy said, shaking his hand. Back in the RV, she sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the flakes of snow melt on the windshield. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard. One new message. Tessa. Please don't go far. Dorothy's chest tightened. She stared at the words until they blurred slightly, then typed back. Dorothy. I'm not running, Peanut. I'm reclaiming. She hit send and let the silence wash in again. The heater hummed. A faint scent of pine drifted from the air freshener on the dash. For the first time, the road ahead didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a destination she'd been steering toward all along. She pulled the RV back onto the main road, merging between snowplows and early commuters. The mountains stood crisp and white on the horizon, watching her go. The title sat in the passenger seat beside her, sealed in a plastic sleeve now. Neat. Official. Untouchable. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from Kyle. Kyle, you're making a mistake. Dorothy's fingers hovered over the screen, then she locked it without replying. The past was a conversation she no longer owed anyone. As she drove, she glanced at the folded appraisal papers on the dash. $32,000 printed in bold at the bottom. The number wasn't just a price tag, it was proof of control. What they'd called junk could carry her anywhere she pleased. She smiled faintly. Not bad for clutter, she murmured. Outside, the wind picked up, lifting snow from the road in silver spirals. The Missoula County Courthouse didn't smell like justice. It smelled like old carpet, burnt coffee, and the faint tang of toner. Dorothy Monroe stood in line outside a frosted glass door marked Small Claims Mediation, Room 2B, clutching her folder to her chest. Her breath fogged faintly in the chill air drifting through the hallway. Lu Chen stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, his calm as steady as always. You sure you don't want me to handle the talking? He murmured. Dorothy smiled faintly. No. I've been spoken for enough in my life. Time I spoke for myself. When the door opened, the clerk called, Monroe versus Monroe? Dorothy exhaled slowly and stepped forward. Lou followed, his notary badge gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. The mediation room was small, all beige walls and buzzing lights, a rectangular table in the center. On one side sat Kyle and Vanessa, their lawyer nowhere to be seen, because small claims didn't allow them. Vanessa's jaw was tight, her hair pinned back so severely it looked painful. Kyle sat beside her, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the table. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with half-moon glasses, gestured to the opposite chairs. Let's all sit down, she said, her tone measured. Professional, the voice of someone used to diffusing family storms. This is a non-adversarial session. We'll review the claim and the evidence, then determine if mediation is appropriate. Dorothy slid into her seat, laying her folder neatly before her. Lou sat one chair away, notebook open. Vanessa wasted no time. She took our RV, she began sharply. It was parked on our property. We paid to store it, we maintained it, and she just drove off with it. The mediator raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Monroe, she said, turning to Dorothy, do you have documentation regarding ownership? Dorothy's hands were steady as she opened the folder. Yes, ma'am. I have the original co-title with my husband, Henry Monroe. She slid the first document across. Upon his passing, ownership transferred solely to me. She placed another paper on top. Here's his death certificate. Lou passed forward the notarized letter, insurance update, and DMV confirmation. The pile grew in quiet authority. The mediator scanned each page carefully, her pen tapping once against the table. Vanessa shifted in her chair, the veneer cracking. She manipulated my husband, she snapped. He was grieving when he filed that paperwork. She took advantage of him. Dorothy's head lifted slowly. Her voice was calm, almost kind. He was already gone, Vanessa. There was no one left to manipulate. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Kyle's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother for the first time. There was something unreadable in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or shame. But he said nothing. The mediator cleared her throat softly. "I see notarization here from Mr. Chen?" Lu nodded. "That's correct. Dated Christmas morning. I confirmed identity, ownership, and insurance. Everything was by the book." Vanessa turned her glare on him. "You helped her steal it." "I helped her document what was already hers," Lu said evenly. The mediator set her pen down. "There's no legal ambiguity," she said. "The title was co-held. Upon Mr. Monroe's death, it transferred automatically to Mrs. Monroe. The documents are valid and properly filed." Vanessa opened her mouth, but the mediator raised a hand. "Case dismissed. There are no grounds for a claim." Dorothy didn't smile. She simply exhaled, a quiet, steady release. The sound of her relief was louder than any gavel could have been. The mediator looked at her kindly. "Mrs. Monroe, is there anything you wish to add before we conclude?" Dorothy folded her hands. "Just one thing." Her voice was soft, but carried. "They didn't push me into a camper. They pushed me into clarity." Even the mediator blinked at that. Kyle stared at the table, unmoving. Vanessa's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Lou closed his notebook, snapping it shut with a quiet finality that filled the room. Outside, the courthouse steps were slick with half-melted snow. Dorothy descended slowly, careful of the ice, her boots crunching with each step. Lou matched her pace. "Feel lighter?" he asked. She looked up at the clouded sky, pale sunlight breaking through the haze. "No," she said. "I feel accurate." Lou chuckled. "That's better than lighter." Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She didn't look at it until she reached the RV. The message preview was just a few words. "Vanessa again. You can't keep her from us forever." Dorothy stared at it, a single muscle tightening in her jaw. "Her?" she murmured. Then she saw the small attached photo, a close-up of Tessa at the kitchen table, chin in her hands, looking down at an empty mug. Dorothy's thumb hovered above the screen. The snow had turned to slush by the time Dorothy reached the end of her old street. The RV's tires hissed over the wet pavement, every rotation whispering a memory she didn't care to replay. Houses glowed faintly in the afternoon gloom, string lights still dangling from gutters, half-frozen wreaths hanging limp on doors. She slowed when she saw the familiar mailbox. Monroe still stenciled in black letters, chipping at the corners. The driveway was clear. Kyle must have shoveled it that morning, but the yard looked bare, the patch of grass where the RV had once sat now just a crusted scar of mud and salt. Dorothy checked the clock on the dash. 2:07. 3 minutes, she told herself. 3 minutes. Then go. She eased the RV up along the curb, engine idling low. Through the frost-speckled windshield she could see the curtains twitch. Someone inside had seen her. The air between them felt like glass. Dorothy reached across the passenger seat and picked up the small package wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with red string. It was Becca's Christmas stocking, the one that used to hang from her fireplace every year. Kyle's little sister, gone too soon, whose memory had been quietly boxed away after the funeral. Dorothy had kept the stocking all these years, packed and repacked, a thread of tenderness the family no longer mentioned. She'd found it again while sorting through a storage bin in the RV. It had smelled faintly of pine and thyme. Now it was the only gift she intended to return. She opened the door halfway and stepped down into the cold. The air bit her cheeks, sharp and alive. She crossed the driveway slowly, boots crunching through the melting snow, and placed the wrapped stocking gently on the hood of Kyle's car. The red string caught a glint of light before the wind tugged it loose. From the house, movement, a blur of color behind the front window. Then the door flew open. "Are you out of your mind?" Vanessa's voice cut across the yard, high and ragged. She was still in her robe, hair messy, eyes wild. "You think you can just show up like this?" Dorothy didn't answer. She turned back toward the RV. Vanessa's feet slapped against the wet driveway. "You don't get to drive up here and—" Dorothy paused halfway up the RV steps and looked over her shoulder. Her expression was calm, unreadable. The wind picked up her gray hair, lifting it slightly. For a heartbeat, the two women stood staring at each other, one vibrating with fury, the other carved from quiet resolve. Inside the window, a small hand pressed to the glass. "Tessa." Dorothy's breath caught. The girl's face was pale, her eyes wide and uncertain. She lifted one hand in a tiny wave. Dorothy smiled softly and returned it. No words, no gestures beyond that. Then she stepped inside the RV and closed the door. Vanessa reached the side of the vehicle and pounded her palm against the metal. "You're pathetic, Dorothy. You hear me? Pathetic." Dorothy sat behind the wheel, her fingers curling gently around the steering wheel's worn leather. She didn't roll the window down. She didn't shout back. She simply honked once. Short, sharp, final. The sound echoed off the houses, startling a few birds from the trees. It was both a goodbye and a declaration. Through the windshield, she saw Vanessa flinch. Dorothy shifted into drive. The RV lurched forward, tires slipping briefly on the icy street before catching grip. Vanessa's shouting faded behind her, swallowed by the engine's steady roar. As she reached the corner, Dorothy glanced once more in the mirror. Tessa had slipped out onto the porch now, coat thrown over her pajamas, barefoot on the frozen step. She waved again, small and solemn. Dorothy lifted her hand in return, just long enough for the girl to see. Then she faced forward. The road ahead gleamed slick with meltwater, pale light glinting across the wet black top. The sound of Vanessa's voice carried one last time, muffled and distant. "You'll regret this," before disappearing completely. Dorothy smiled faintly. "I already did," she murmured. "Now I'm done." She pressed the accelerator gently. The RV moved steady and sure, its reflection flickering in every patch of pooled water. Behind her, the little brown parcel sat on the hood of the car, the red string fluttering loose in the wind. The road out of Missoula unfurled like ribbon, wet, glinting, endless. Dorothy drove until the highway signs blurred into a rhythm. Exit, town, gas, sky. The hum of the tires steadied her pulse. Each mile felt like loosening a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for years. By dusk, she pulled into a turnout overlooking Flathead Lake. The water below was a sheet of pewter under the setting sun, ripples catching streaks of pink and orange. Dorothy shut off the engine and sat in the cooling silence. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the windshield. Older? Yes, but somehow lighter. She pulled the appraisal papers from the dash, smoothing the creases with careful fingers. $32,000. Enough for a small apartment. Enough for comfort. For a moment the thought lingered. Sell the RV. Start over somewhere permanent. Rent a place with a porch swing. Maybe a neighbor who says good morning. But the idea sat wrong. Too still. Too quiet. She looked out over the water, the sky fading from violet to deep blue. The world was vast and shifting, and for the first time in a long while, she realized she didn't want stillness. She wanted motion. Dorothy reached for her notepad and wrote across a blank page in bold letters, "Places I've never been." The pen moved easily, as if guided by something older than courage. She listed names as they came to her. Coeur d'Alene, Jackson Hole, Cody, Sheridan, Deadwood. Then she paused, tapped the pen against her lip, and added one more. Hope, Idaho. She smiled. Seems fitting. The cold crept in as night deepened. She switched on the small lamp above the kitchenette, its yellow glow soft against the aluminum walls. The RV felt different now. Not a cage, not a memory, but a vessel. She reached into the storage compartment under the bed and pulled out a weathered box marked Hank's Maps. Inside, the scent of old paper rose up, dry and comforting. Folded maps, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, creased and faded from years of road trips long ago. She spread them across the table, tracing the lines with her fingertip. His handwriting was still there in pencil. Arrows toward diners, campgrounds, little notes like "good pie here" and "ask for extra bacon." She laughed softly, the sound echoing in the small space. She pinned the maps along the RV's walls with pushpins, edges overlapping in a collage of routes and promises. When she finished, she stepped back and looked around. The once bare walls were alive again, alive with memory, with intention. Her phone buzzed where it rested on the counter. A text from Reverend Mark. "Heard you stop by your old place. How are you holding up?" Dorothy typed back. "Still standing." He replied almost instantly. "Good. Remember, home isn't where they tolerate you. It's where you breathe." Dorothy read the line twice. Then she set the phone down and stepped outside. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't care. The air was sharp, clean, honest. She breathed in deeply, chest lifting, exhaling until her shoulders dropped. "I can breathe here," she whispered. When she stepped back inside, she pulled her small laptop from the cupboard, the one she'd barely used since Hank passed. She searched lakeside RV communities, monthly rates. A list popped up. Photos of snow-framed trailers and campfires glowing under string lights. One caught her eye. Blue Heron Landing, Idaho. 3-month winter stay. Lakeside lot. Pets welcome. Dorothy clicked reserve. The confirmation email chimed a moment later, crisp and satisfying. She leaned back, smiling. The heater purred, the maps fluttered faintly with each gust from the vent. She poured herself a small mug of cocoa, her nightly ritual, and glanced at the empty passenger seat. "Well, Hank," she murmured, "looks like we're finally taking that trip you promised." The words felt right. True. Outside, a gust of wind swept across the lake, shaking the trees and scattering the snow from their branches. Dorothy sat at the wheel again, just to feel it, the leather, the weight, the promise. Her headlights caught the road ahead, a pale ribbon disappearing into night. The morning at Blue Heron Landing broke slow and soft, a pale wash of gold spreading over the frozen lake. Dorothy woke to the sound of gulls and the rhythmic tap of sleet against the window. The RV had settled into its new spot, a corner lot overlooking the water, the kind of view people drove hundreds of miles to find. She brewed her coffee and opened the small fold-out table by the window. The maps Hank had once drawn were now her wallpaper, a patchwork of possibility. She traced the blue route lines with her fingertip until her hand came to rest on the note he'd written years ago near Coeur d'Alene. "Keep going till it feels right." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "It's starting to," she whispered. Reaching into the drawer, Dorothy pulled out her journal, the same one she'd used to document the chaos back in Missoula. Now, the pages were softer, the ink calmer. She flipped to a blank one, uncapped her pen, and began to write a letter addressed simply, "To me. You stayed kind, and didn't stay small. You didn't let their noise shrink your quiet. You didn't drive away to escape. You drove to remember who you were before they forgot." Her handwriting wobbled a little near the end, but she didn't correct it. Imperfection looked honest on the page. A knock on the door broke her concentration. Lou stood outside, bundled in his parka, smiling against the wind. "Mail call," he said, holding up a small padded envelope. Dorothy raised a brow. "I didn't order anything." He shrugged, passing it over. Didn't come from a store. Came from me. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was a laminated document, the RV title gleaming under the plastic. A backup copy, stamped and sealed. Insurance against life's nonsense, Lou said, grinning. Dorothy ran a hand over it, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. You think of everything. I try, Lou said. You deserve to feel untouchable for once. She smiled. I don't need to feel untouchable, just steady. That's the same thing, he said, tipping an invisible hat before heading back toward his van. Dorothy watched him go, the snow crunching under his boots. Inside again, she placed the laminated title on the table beside her coffee. It caught the sunlight streaming through the frosted window, the gold letters of her name glinting like proof. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Dot? Vanessa's voice came through, rough with fatigue, and something else. Not fury this time, pleading. Please, can we just talk? Dorothy stayed silent. Kyle and I, just want to fix this, Vanessa continued. You've made your point, okay? You don't have to... Her voice cracked. You don't have to keep punishing us. Dorothy looked out at the lake, where sunlight was breaking through the clouds in shards of silver. I'm not punishing anyone, she said finally. I just stopped letting you. Vanessa's tone hardened instantly. You can't keep running forever, Dorothy. Dorothy smiled softly. That's what roads are for. Then she ended the call and, without hesitation, blocked the number. Minutes later, the phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail notification. She pressed play. Kyle's voice filled the small cabin. Weary, uneven. Mom, look, we just want to talk. I don't know what Vanessa said. Maybe she went too far. I don't want this to be how we end things. Dorothy closed her eyes, listening until the message clicked off. The silence afterward felt like air after a storm, thick but breathable. She opened a new message thread, typed slowly, deliberately. Dorothy. I own peace now. You can't borrow it. She hit send. The words glowed for a second, then disappeared into the ether. The lake shifted color outside, gray to silver, silver to blue. Dorothy poured herself another cup of coffee and leaned back, the laminated title still reflecting light beside her. An hour passed. The quiet was broken only by the creak of the heater and the soft knock of sleet turning to rain. Then her phone buzzed one last time. Tessa. Photo attached. Dorothy opened it. The picture showed Tessa's lunchbox sitting on a cafeteria table, pink with a sticker that read, RV, there yet? In the corner, the girl's mittened hand flashed a peace sign. The caption underneath read, Miss you. Dorothy's throat tightened, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She typed back only one word, Dorothy. Always. She set the phone face down, heart steady but full. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air glowed with the faintest trace of sunlight breaking through. Dorothy picked up the laminated title, holding it like something sacred. The reflection of her face shimmered faintly in the plastic, lined, weathered, alive. The road curved along the lake like a silver thread, its edges softened by snowmelt and the first hints of spring. Dorothy drove with one hand resting lightly on the wheel, the other on a travel mug that smelled faintly of cinnamon cocoa. The hum of the RV's engine filled the quiet like a heartbeat she could trust. Idaho's pine forests gave way to wide, open valleys. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, pale blue at the horizon, deepening as she crossed into Wyoming. Every few miles she passed another RV. Vintage ones, new ones, patched together ones like hers, all moving at their own pace, each one carrying someone's private kind of freedom. When she stopped for gas outside of Cody, a row of campers sat parked near the edge of a frozen pond. A few women huddled around a fold-out table, steam rising from tin mugs. One of them waved when Dorothy stepped out, her knit cap tilted over silver hair. "Come warm up," the woman called. "Coffee's strong, and company's free." Dorothy hesitated for a moment, then smiled and walked over. The circle expanded to make room for her. Names floated around the group: June from Oregon, Patty from Kansas, Lila from Maine. The air smelled like percolated coffee and wood smoke. Their laughter carried the easy rhythm of people who'd traded permanence for peace. Lila nudged Dorothy's shoulder. "First season out?" Dorothy chuckled. "That obvious?" "We all had that look once," June said. "The I can't believe I actually did it face." Dorothy poured herself a mug from the communal thermos. "It's strange," she said. "You'd think the hard part was leaving. Turns out the hard part was staying too long." That earned a low murmur of understanding. No one asked for details. Out here, people didn't need backstories to share warmth. They swapped road tips: where to find the cheapest propane, which park rangers looked the other way if you stayed past checkout. Someone mentioned a nearby lakeside park that held weekly gatherings for women on the road, part support group, part potluck. "You should come," Patty said. "We talk, laugh, fix each other's leaks. And if you make cocoa, you're automatically in." Dorothy smiled. "I think I can handle that." That evening, she parked the RV near the edge of a frozen lake, the sky bruised purple and gold. A small fire pit glowed at the center of a circle of campers. Women bundled in blankets shared folding chairs and stories. Dorothy joined them, her hands busy with the pot of cocoa simmering on her portable stove. When she passed the first mug to June, the woman sniffed it and grinned. "Homemade?" "From scratch," Dorothy said. "Bus driver's tradition. Kept me sane for 30 years. "Bus driver, huh?" Dorothy nodded. "Kids taught me patience. Engines taught me control." She stirred the pot slowly, the chocolate scent wrapping around the night air. "Both came in handy lately." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was warm, like the glow from the fire itself. Someone mentioned a support group nearby for widows who traveled full-time. The organizer, a brisk woman with kind eyes, turned to Dorothy. "You should come speak next week. Tell your story." Dorothy blinked. "My story?" "You'd be surprised who needs to hear it," the woman said. "Some of us are still learning how to start the engine again." Dorothy looked out at the lake, its surface mirroring the firelight. "Maybe," she said softly, "if I can figure out where to start." "Start right where you found your breath again," the woman replied. Dorothy thought of Reverend Mark's words. "Home isn't where they tolerate you, it's where you breathe." She smiled. "That seems right." The group passed mugs, traded laughter, and hummed along to a quiet country tune someone played on a small radio. The night settled around them like a soft quilt. Dorothy looked up at the stars, unbothered, uncountable, and realized that for the first time in years, she felt full. Not the kind of full that comes from food or forgiveness, but from finally being in motion, on her own terms. Later, back in the RV, she checked her phone before bed. One new voice message. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then pressed play. Tessa's voice filled the quiet. "Hi, Grandma. Mom doesn't know I called. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." There was a pause, a small sniffle. "I think about your cocoa a lot. Miss you." Dorothy's breath caught. She smiled through the sting in her chest. She pressed record and whispered, "Me too, Peanut." Then she ended the message before her voice could waver. Outside, the moonlight rippled across the lake, turning the snow to glass. The RV creaked gently in the wind, the sound like an exhale. Dorothy leaned back against the window and closed her eyes. The hum of distant engines echoed softly through the night, a chorus of travelers finding their own way home. The wind had picked up again by dawn, sweeping over the lake and rattling the RV's windows. Dorothy stirred from her bunk, half dreaming of old roads and warm hands. She pulled on her wool sweater and started the kettle, the ritual grounding her as much as the cocoa that would follow. Outside, the world was soft with fog. The campfire circle from the night before was gone, just a ring of ash and footprints half buried in frost. Dorothy stepped out with her mug, watching the mist rise from the lake. That's when she saw it. A woman standing near the road, thin coat flapping, one hand shielding her eyes. Dorothy hesitated only a second before calling out, "You all right there?" The woman startled, then gave a small, uncertain wave. "My car. It won't start. I think the battery's done. I tried calling roadside, but no service." Her breath came out in ragged clouds. She looked maybe mid-40s, the kind of tired that wasn't just from lack of sleep. "Come in," Dorothy said, motioning to the RV. "You'll freeze out here." The woman hesitated, then nodded. Inside, she perched gingerly on the bench seat while Dorothy poured steaming cocoa into a mug and slid it across the table. "Drink that before you start shivering in earnest." The woman took a careful sip, her hands trembling slightly. "You didn't have to?" Dorothy smiled. "No one's ever owed cocoa. It's a standing offer." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the low whistle of the wind through the vent. The woman's color slowly returned. She glanced around at the walls, maps layered like feathers, photos tucked between them, a life reclaimed piece by piece. "This is yours?" she asked softly. "All mine," Dorothy said. "Took me a while to remember I could say that." The woman nodded, eyes distant. "I left in a hurry. Guess I forgot to pack that kind of courage." Dorothy didn't pry. She recognized that look, the fragile calm of someone who's just run from something heavy. "Where you headed?" she asked instead. "Town, maybe. Anywhere there's quiet." Dorothy smiled faintly. "I can get you that far." She slid behind the wheel, gesturing toward the passenger seat. "You warm enough?" The woman nodded, hugging the mug to her chest. The RV rumbled to life, the heater coughing once before blowing warm air through the vents. They pulled out of the lot, tires crunching through the thin crust of snow. The lake shimmered to their left, a dull silver mirror. As the road wound upward, the woman spoke again, her voice quieter now. "You don't even know me. Why are you being kind?" Dorothy kept her eyes on the road. "Because someone once let me sit in the warmth when I didn't deserve it. Figured I should return the favor." The woman stared at her hands. "No one's ever let me just breathe before." Dorothy glanced over, her expression gentle. "It's the first rule in this RV," she said. "You breathe first. Everything else comes after." The woman smiled faintly, the lines around her mouth softening. They drove in companionable silence for miles. The fog began to lift, revealing the ridges ahead, sharp, sunlit, endless. Dorothy could feel the pull of the open road deep in her chest again, that same wild steadiness that had carried her through every mile since Christmas. As the town came into view below, Dorothy eased off the gas. "You can catch the bus at the cafe there," she said. "They've got good soup and outlets to charge your phone." The woman reached for the door handle, then paused. "You don't even know my name." Dorothy shrugged lightly. "Doesn't matter. You know where to find warmth if you need it again." For a moment, neither moved. Then the woman smiled, small, grateful, and stepped down onto the snowy shoulder. Dorothy watched her walk toward town, her figure growing smaller until it blurred into the white. Inside the RV, the quiet returned. Dorothy sat back, fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel. Her gaze drifted to the glove box. She opened it slowly, the hinges creaking like old bones. Inside lay the laminated title, edges still clean and gleaming. She touched it with the tips of her fingers, the cool plastic grounding her. "This," she whispered, "isn't just paper." She slid the glove box shut, shifted into drive, and pulled back onto the highway. The sky was wide open now, a wash of pale blue streaked with sunlight. The road curved ahead, promising more of everything: distance, freedom, sky. Her reflection caught briefly in the rearview mirror. Steady eyes, a hint of a smile. The wind rushed over the RV's hood as she picked up speed. At Christmas, my son and DIL pushed me into the RV. So I drove off with its title in my glove box.